think most of us would agree that memory is one of the most important functions or skills that we use and require as human beings. Imagine living without memory. If we didn't have memories, we would live in an eternal present. We wouldn't have a past. We wouldn't have a future. We wouldn't know what we wanted. We would go through the same thoughts and the same questions over and over again. We'd never know or understand anything. We'd re-experience our fears over and over again. Without memory, we wouldn't be able to speak. We wouldn't know what to speak about. We wouldn't know anything. We wouldn't know how to make decisions about anything. We wouldn't be able to do the most basic things like cooking, washing, maintaining relationships, maintaining our everyday lives. Much more importantly, without memory there is no knowledge. Without knowledge there's no building of knowledge. Without memory it wouldn't be possible to do anything that's a goal or an ambition of any kind. Fundamentally, our identity lies in memory. Without memory, we wouldn't even know who we are. Because, think about it for a moment, we do only live in the present. There is only the present. All of your life, all of everything that you've experienced and everything that you know is a memory. Without memory, there is no identity. So, we need to actually talk a little bit about what memory is and what the problems of memory are before we get into the details of how can we build and improve our memory so that we can create a better sense of identity, better sense of our own lives, better knowledge and better goals. Most importantly, better meaning, because without all of those things that I've mentioned, there isn't a meaning of life. What memory is a process by which we experience something. In the immediate after effect, we put that into our short-term memory, where we understand and see what we've experienced. And then moments later, minutes later at the most, we need to transfer that to our long-term memory in order for it to be stored. It is possible sometimes that things that are experienced or that are in the short-term memory are not transferred to the long-term memory, and then indeed they are lost for good. And there are some problems or disorders where there is a prevention of transference from the short-term to the long-term memory, and the extreme cases of people who never remember anything that just happened, and which is, of course, can be a very, very serious problem, unfortunately a relatively rare one. So it sounds like as long as we make sure everything is transferred into the long-term memory, then everything's going to be hunky-dory, and that mysterious process that memory is will ensure that everything's fine. But amazingly, memory isn't nearly as accurate as we think it is. So the two issues that exist with memory is that on the one hand, we just forget. For some reason, we just forget. Even stuff that has been stored in the long-term memory isn't always accessible to us. So just forget. And on the other hand, memory is not accurate. We tend to believe that memory is accurate, but there are all sorts of reasons why memory is not accurate. And so between forgetting or creating inaccurate memories for ourselves, versions of those memories, memory can potentially create some problems. Memory is important because, as I've said earlier on, without memory we are no one. Our identity is in fact the memory of who we are. Everything that's happened to us and everything that we do in the past is our sense of this is who I am, this is what I do, this is what happened, and this is why. But even still, notwithstanding the importance of all of that, memory is highly fallible, and strange things happen to us when we remember and when we don't remember. I mean, a psychologist shows that people who have very severe memory loss tend to make up situations, make up their past, instead of have a blank space there, because our brain just doesn't want to work that way. So the evidence is that when we lack a memory that we should have, we create that memory, because not remembering means we lost a little part of ourselves. if everything about memory is to do with identity, if everything identity is about memory, then if we realize I don't remember something, it's like saying I don't remember who I am, which is a very frightening thought. So instead we'll create a memory, and our brain will create memories that are just as good as the real thing. There are many reasons why we do that. Most basic reasons are things like, for example, what are called cognitive biases. Cognitive bias is when we make an error in our thinking that then later affects our decisions and our judgments and so on. So the way that we remember things is biased. For all sorts of reasons. We might want to not have our beliefs challenged about something. We might be focused on a particular thing. We might have a whole bunch of assumptions about something that's going on. And so the way that we store the memory is actually biased by those things. Or more simply, by not paying attention. Attention, we can't pay attention to everything. So we bias to pay attention to certain things. We hear a whole bunch of stuff, but we're only paying attention to the stuff that we're interested in. All those kind of cognitive biases really are a result of your brain trying to simplify the world and trying to get simple information to put in easily and quickly. And we need to make judgments quickly, we need to respond to the world quickly, and that creates gaps and, unfortunately, biases that make incorrect memories. We store incorrect memories. In fact, memory is not at all reliable. On the one hand, there is that making things up, and on the other hand, there's things like nostalgia. In nostalgia, when we tend to remember the good stuff, we tend to idealize the past or distort our memory of something. And the Romans used to say the past is always well remembered. We remember the best, and sometimes it gets better and better every time we tell it. The story gets better and the past is improved, and that makes memory clearly unreliable. We actually curate our memories. We don't really keep the memories that don't gel with who we identify ourselves to be. If memory is such a strong relationship with identity, those ones get very easily discarded. So that's another kind of a bias. We remember the things that fit with our world and fit with who we know ourselves to be. We discard those memories which conflict with what we believe about ourselves or conflict with what we believe about the world. And then we create what we think is reality. There's a lot of evidence to show that very strong memories can be completely wrong. So the argument has always been that emotion really makes us remember something strongly. It's called the Flashbulb Effect. It's like a flashbulb goes off under emotional intensity, and that part is strongly remembered. And then because of that, we think then we remember everything else just as well. So you watching a disaster like 9/11 happen in front of your eyes. It's such a powerful and emotionally intensely event that you remember it very, very clearly. But you may be, unfortunately standing in the street in New York while all of that is happening, and there's stuff going on around you, that later on, your memory of that is completely false. So, just to make up a silly one, you say, and in the middle of all of that, I saw a whole bunch of animals that must have come out of a pet shop in terror, run across the road. Maybe there was one animal and maybe there were none. And sometimes is that the intensity of the emotional thing makes everything else fade into a vague memory that we then confabulate. So the emotional effect is not necessarily a good effect. We tend to assume that because the central event was so strong, the memory of the other events is just as good. But it actually isn't. Turns out that it's the other way around. Our own confidence is part of the lie, and that creates big issues for things like court cases. Court cases are very problematical because they often rely on witness memory. And witness memory is clearly wrong, especially around an emotional incident where the incident is remembered, but all the details around it are often fabricated because our brain is filling them in. We only pay attention to so much at one time anyway. And unfortunately, we can't tell the difference. It looks exactly the same. There have been all sorts of studies nowadays even to show that emotion ruins memory rather than creates the flashbulb effect. The truth is probably that both happen. Sometimes emotion enhances a memory and then causes everything else to become fabricated around it. Sometimes emotion distorts the memory and makes our own connections and associations with it become more important than what actually happened. And again, we create our own version of what actually happened. Even under hypnosis, we fabricate. In fantastic studies have been shown that things that we see under hypnosis can be processed as a memory of an event. A page that we read can be processed as an event that happened to ourselves under hypnosis. Hypnosis itself is a mysterious thing that we don't understand well, and it's got problems of its own if we're trying to use it to prove something. But at least it proves the point that it's very difficult to distinguish between actual memories and fake memories, and certainly enhances the danger of the belief in repressed memory and the danger in the belief, similarly, that what's happening in the courtroom, the remembered story, is actually true. So we know that it isn't. So what we're dealing with here is there's so much about our identity that is subject to things which are not real, which are fake or false or misremembered things, and in many ways the version we have of ourselves is not always then the best or the truest version. There are other reasons why we need good memories, because it's not only about ourselves, it's also about what we know. So, given that rather alarming unreliability of memory, is there anything we can actually do to improve our memory? Especially since, as I've said, it gets worse as we get older and other things tend to affect it. And from the most basic things, even some of the most obvious things, things like exercising more, sleeping more, eating healthily, there are also some proven techniques that really work in order to help you remember things in general and help you to remember specific things. Let's have a look at 10 basic techniques that will help you do that. The first of those, I did already say, and that is getting enough sleep. Sleep has been shown lately over and over again to have such an important impact on so many functions in our lives. So much so that it seems that adults who get less than 7 hours of sleep a day seriously impair their health, and less than 8 hours a day may still be impairing their health. We've always been told to sleep 8 hours a day. Many people don't. Many people, whether they suffer from insomnia or there are other reasons that they can't sleep, probably do too much, and that's a major reason why we forget things and we don't get enough sleep. But in the end, getting more sleep really helps you remember more. You've seen it yourself. If you read something when you're tired, or if you watch a movie when you're tired, you don't really remember much about it afterwards, because simply speaking, getting more sleep helps you pay better attention, and that means you're concentrating more and storing more information as a result. Basically, in order to actually deal with all the information, the experiences, what we've read, the memories, the stuff that's fed into the brain that changes from short-term memory into long-term memory, needs to be consolidated by the process of sleep. It seems, in fact, no matter how well you've input the information at the time, on the day, unless you get some good sleep that same night, you're probably going to forget what it is or lose the quality of that information. So getting enough sleep at night consolidates memory and therefore helps us remember more. I also said in all of that it helps us pay more attention. And we can deliberately pay more attention. It's something that can be consciously done. It's not hard to do. And that can significantly increase memory as well. Basically, in order to put the memories in, we need to be focusing on them in every kind of a way. You need to create interest for yourself. Be interested. So allow yourself to be amazed and delighted by everything, which is something that many spiritual gurus have taught us as well. But you can usually find a little something and focus on that thing and make sure that that allows you to pay attention to what is being said or seen or done. As I've said, even if you get called up for court as a witness later on, at this point I'm not so sure how much that's going to help, having heard everything that we've heard about memory, but nevertheless, that's your best option. And more important than that, for your own benefit, and for your own use, and for all the important reasons, the identity-related reasons that I mentioned earlier on, all those important reasons why we actually need to process those memories more effectively. One of the ways to pay attention more is to involve your senses. Try and deliberately engage your senses. Ask yourself, can I hear something or can I smell something? Smell is the most powerful storer of memories. It's because the smell center in the brain is where some of the deepest memories are kept and some of the oldest memories are kept. So smell is a very powerful way, but all the senses are. If you deliberately engage your senses, perhaps easier than seeing everything as a miracle, that's definitely a way to get the information in more, to get better quality information in more. And, you know, even if you're reading, even if you're trying to remember something that you're reading, how do you get your senses more involved? Well, you can read it out loud. If you read it out loud, you can hear yourself saying it as well. And if you write it down, in fact, writing it down is one of the most powerful ways to help store memory. It seems as if the processes in the brain and the areas of the brain associated with the act of writing also are associated with memory storage. Important note, they are not associated with the act of typing. When we type, we don't remember very easily. We don't process it in the same part of the brain. We're using a different type of skill than what writing is. Writing is a deliberate creation of those letters, however well and automatic it seems. Typing is a mechanical act that we can do without even paying attention to what we're doing. You can't really do that. If you don't watch what you're writing, it's going to become garbage in seconds. If you don't watch what you're typing, you're a better typist. That's one of the rules for being a good typist. So, certainly writing it down engages the physical, it engages the ears if you're reading it, saying it aloud, or say it aloud, summarize it into a point and write that point down. Those of you who remember writing down at school, university, whatever, well, that's how your memory worked for that. And one of the things, fourth point, that can also do for you is help you structure or restructure information. Creating a structure is a very good way to remember things, and that's why we create lists, why we put headings and lists or check boxes. Creating structures around what you remember, what you need to remember, helps you then recall it later. For example, you can recall that there were 10 items on the list, so that helps you remember them. Or you can even recall, if you're physically writing it down, that there was a heading just under the list and a heading just above the list. What was that heading just under the list again? So creating structures engages various parts of your senses and of your mind, and literally itself creates a structure on which you're going to hang the memory. It's why telephone numbers are broken up in 3-3-4 pattern or 2-3-4 pattern in order for us to remember it more easily. And that was studied extensively by those who study those things. What all of that also relates to, a fifth point, is putting some kind of process onto that information. Writing it down is a process, also engages the physical, but in any kind of process, writing, organizing, reorganizing, that's what also makes us remember it. In the same way that I said earlier on, sleeping helps the brain consolidate and turn things into long-term memory. The conscious process we can do is actually any kind of processing. Writing, structuring, restructuring, all of that helps us remember it later on. We can also do the trick of memory, the trick of the memory artists, those people who can remember enormous lists of things, relating it to other things. That's how we do that. So on the one hand, you can relate information to things you already know. So when you hear some new information or receive some new information, you can ask yourself a question. You can say, doesn't that remind me of, or is that similar to, or is that different? But find something else that you can bounce off that memory, either something that agrees with it or something that disagrees with it. And it's that great process that will help you then remember later on what it is that you need to know. Remember what the new information is. I remember it because it was so different than what I thought or than what I kind of thought that I already knew. Similar to that is to use mnemonic devices. So, it's famously especially used for remembering lists of things, and people can remember enormous lists of things. But if you, especially those who study the sciences, remember using mnemonic techniques where you might use the first letter of everything in a list. Medical students famously, for all the number of bones in the body, do that, for the number of all the different muscles in the body. All of those methods familiar to us all are things which really help us remember. Using visual techniques as well. So a common technique is to associate each item on the list with a visual image or with a place. We've got outstanding three-dimensional spatial memory in our brains, like most animals do. We can very successfully negotiate three-dimensional spaces because of our processing of them and understanding the relationships between things. So we can plant memories into that. And if you imagine, visualize something associated with that memory, it doesn't have to be directly associated, it could just be something that rhymes or something that makes you think of it. Every time someone talks about, say, the Dutch, I think about oranges. Dutch's colour is orange, famously in soccer, national colour. So it's oranges. Oranges themselves don't have anything to do with the Dutch. But if I'm trying to remember all the countries that were involved, I'll put an orange into the kitchen because I've got a Dutch oven in the kitchen. So when I remember an orange in the kitchen, I remember, it's an orange, it's the kitchen, it's the Dutch oven, not Dutch, it's the Dutch. It was the Dutch who won that war. And so that's a very successful method because our visual and color memories are very strong. We work better in visual and symbolic than we actually do in language. So a great way to enhance your memory. It can get down to a little bit more nuts and bolts than that. Rehearsing things, repeating them. When you hear something new and you gain new information, repeating it, rehearsing it. It's when we study something, we rehearse it and review something. When you study an instrument or you're studying some knowledge you're trying to gain, rehearsing, repeating, rehearsing, repeating. It's the oldest thing in the book. That's how actors remember lines. Just repeating it over and over again makes us remember. It's the kind of bulldozer approach, but it works every time. A more subtle way is to look at the context of the memory. So when you're in a situation, to connect it to the situation that you're in, so that you can remember how you were feeling, where you were, what was going on. That can sometimes help you remember what the situation was. We have seen earlier how there's a lot of controversy about the relationship between emotion and memory, and it seems as if there's evidence for both sides, whether it improves memory or whether it interferes with memory. But a good balance between it for us at the practical level is just to look at it from the point of view of context. Find a context for that memory. And so place is also a good example of context, just like mood is. What was I doing at the time? And that's the context that you're looking for. Especially trying to remember who someone is or what is their name. So at the time when you hear someone's name, so many people struggle with remembering names. Create an immediate context for it. Create the event that you were at as a memory. Find a visual connection or a place, spatial connection for that memory, and try and find a little fun mnemonic. Connect their name to the color of something that they're wearing or the style of it. Even if it's naughty or funny, it's only in your own mind. And that's going to make an enormous difference. Because ultimately, 10th point, be creative. The more strange you are, the more bizarre your imagery is, the more you're going to remember it. And when you create a little bit of weirdness and unfamiliarity, that sticks. And connect that to whatever it is that you're trying to remember can make an enormous difference to the outcome. In the end, as we've seen, in so many ways, memory makes us who we are. Perhaps we are nothing but our memories, because without our memories, what are we? So, identity is not a thing, it is a collection of all our memories of who we are and what we've done. If we treat those preciously, honor them, but also remember that they are a subjective collection of things, a precious and valuable collection of things, because they make us who we are. In the end, they can help us discover and rediscover who we are. One thing you won't forget is to join me same time, same place next week.